Bam, there it is.
This is Chris Koslowski, and you're watching The Break It Down Show.
We get to have a good time around here. We get to do dope things with dope people, and Chris is no exception. He's written, I think, a great and fun book. It's what do you say, Kayfabe, or how do you say the name of the character?
Kayfabe, yes, that's
Kayfabe,
the name of the book.
okay.
Yeah.
You wrote a book about wrestling, and look, what a riot! Like, why not? Why not write a book? So, are you a big wrestling fan from way back, or how did you get into the whole wrestling idea enough to spend time to write a book?
Sure. I guess the journey begins. I'm the perfect age to be a pro wrestling fan. I'm 36 now.
Mm-hmm.
So I was like a 10-year-old back in the late 90s when, WWF, WCW were going at it, Monday Night Wars, Vince McMahon versus Ted Turner. What a lot of people say is kind of wrestling's golden age. So I think the wrestling was marketed to exactly me. So it was no mistake that I became a fan. I think like a lot of kids, I grew out of it, right? I got interested in other things. Rediscovered wrestling in grad school as somebody. I was in grad school for creative writing, thinking about storytelling, and realized that, hey, there's something going on with storytelling and wrestling that people that run in my circles don't really pay attention to. Wrestling traditionally is sort of considered lowbrow entertainment. I'm in this artsy fartsy MFA program, and I thought, hey, they're the way they're telling stories through wrestling is something I wanted to explore. And that just so happened to be a really good time to get into wrestling too, because this is around WrestleMania 30. You had Daniel Bryan, you had CM Punk doing interesting things with reality and fiction, his famous pipe bomb promo.
Yeah.
So it just drew me right in. And I thought there's something interesting here that I hadn't noticed before.
Yeah, I was really big into wrestling when I was a kid, and this is mid '80s, right? So this is like WrestleMania 1,
Sure.
and that time frame. And there was WWF, but then all of the other, I guess we'll call them independent leagues, but some of them were comparable to the to the WWF. And so we didn't have certain acts were not in the World Wrestling Federation. They were in the whatever. And there's just all kinds of letters. No one cares about this stuff. But to learn about these things, you had to live in Florida, where it was huge. And they sold all of the magazines. And for anybody who didn't know that time, it was like a not quite glossy, and it wasn't perfect bound. It was staple bound. It was really thin, and then cheap pages on the inside, and pictures and text. And you would rip through and oh, look what Hawk is doing. And so you knew about the Legion of Doom. You knew about the British Bulldogs before they got to the WWF. But you had to be ahead to do that. You had to be able to, buy these magazines and then learn how to get them if you lived like me in California. And so when you discovered these things, it was an even bigger part of the story, because there was the mystery around who these guys, Ric Flair wasn't in the WWF right away. He just wasn't. And so these characters were not only interesting, but they were elusive.
Right. Yeah. Their legend preceded them. Right. Back when you heard about Andre the Giant, and you wondered, truthfully, is he actually a giant? Is he more than human somehow? And I think wrestling definitely used that in the early days, I do wonder what it was like back then, because I think one of the reasons why I fell back into wrestling was it was so easy to consume, quite the opposite, right? WWE had just started their streaming platform, so you could watch any match from any point of their history, any WCW match. Even small promotions will have, they'll be televised, or you can subscribe to them and get streams on YouTube. So it's never been easier to be a fan. So you've lost some of that mystery and who's coming into town.
Well, and the other thing they were good at doing, and you had to kind of know to know, but when they would come to Oakland, where I lived, they had this guy SD Special Delivery Jones, and he would lose everywhere else, but he always won in Oakland. Sure. And they would put him up against the good guy, right? He maybe wouldn't beat Big John Studd, but the guy below Big John Studd, he beat that guy. And you'd be like, yeah, SD's going to win tonight. We got to go. And so there was all of this great stuff. And I'm saying this because this is all part of the story, right? Because, I don't know, I think and this is me remembering 40 plus years ago, but I think he fought against the Junkyard Dog, and to beat the Junkyard Dog back then was huge. And so here's our hometown guy, whether or not he's really from Oakland, who knows? But he probably was. And he beats the Junkyard Dog. You're losing your mind because your guy is winning, and it's not expected. It was such great. The stories were great.
Yeah, that's neat. I love how wrestling does like bubble up from these like little micro fandoms, right? And you have people that ran certain parts of the country, like Flair was like Carolinas, right? Then you had people in the Ohio Valley, and you had the people in Appalachia, people in the South, and then Northeast, and all these territories. So it's just fun how these little like micro kingdoms were set up and all these local celebrities. That's pretty awesome. It's cool that you were there to experience that.
Yeah, well, and just like sticking with the storytelling thing, it used to be that regional acts, regional bands, you could really make a living and have a regional hit, even though you didn't make a big hit in LA, but you did have a hit in the Ohio Valley, and you could tour indefinitely on that and just run all around that giant 1,000 square mile area and just work. And so the same thing in wrestling, where you built up your audience and your cred, and you could climb up the ticket, and then maybe you could jump into another region, and when these like the Fabulous Thunderbirds got introduced in the WWF, and all these other acts that jumped over, if you knew about the other, the other leagues, when you knew that they were coming, you're like, oh, these guys are awesome. I can't wait to see. And one of the things that the other, I always call them the outlaw leagues, because they weren't the WWF. They weren't outlaws, but that's kind of how they were perceived. They would do things like they would cut, and you're like, these guys are crazy. They do the cutting. They do chair blasts and stuff. And so, yeah, it was amazing knowing that was coming too. And so all of this stuff, you move it forward 25 years, and the product from the 80s just was so much bigger, and the stories were crazy. And like you said, they were warping that line between reality and like people going into the ambulance and all this other stuff. And you're like, is he really hurt? Like, you really kind of didn't know.
That's one of my favorite things about wrestling is you never quite know. Even today when it's completely opaque, and they will, WWE will interview The Undertaker, who was famously like never broke kayfabe. He like will do official interviews as Mark Calloway. Now it's like not a thing, but they know, and they'll play with that sometimes, and they'll fake an injury, or they'll do something where it's like, did something go wrong? And then sometimes they show you like, haha, we're just playing with you. And sometimes they don't, and you don't really know. And there's always that tension. And I think some of the best matches have like work with that tension and that expectation, and that, you don't know. It's fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah. And then the guys that are flipping and, going from heel to face and all that stuff back and forth. And it's just, it is a lot of fun. The theater of all of it. When you watch it and you use your MFA brain, what I guess not genres, but like what avenues, what stages are they using things from? Who's writing this stuff? I mean, these are real professional storylines that they're creating, right?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, the big promotions have writers, and I remember they're seeing a job posting for one once and thinking about, well, maybe, but my assumption is they get people with, more closer ties to the business. So yeah, I mean, there's writers. I think a lot. Wrestling is. I'm not a wrestler. I don't really know any wrestlers. I've done research. Right. I've been on forums, but I'm definitely a fan. So if you ever want to know what wrestling's really like talk to a wrestler, read a wrestler autobiography. Like I don't want to pretend like I know more than I do. But my understanding is that most matches are written in a sense that they're like the big moments are planned, before. And then, but minute by minute, wrestlers are communicating, they're improvising, they're talking to each other, they're calling moves in the ring. They're reacting to the crowd. So it's not like every step is, predetermined. Some matches are like that famously, but most of the time it's a mix between, okay, we've hit the big spots, and then in the middle, we're going to improvise. And if we have like a really important promo to give, that will be kind of scripted. But then I think the expectation is that, the wrestlers are pros and they can put their own spin on it.
Yeah. Yeah, there's just so many great characters. I just think about like the Iron Sheik, and I cannot think of the Russian guy's name right now, but they were such great characters. And the Iron Sheik was just wonderful. And I'm going somewhere with this, but like he would say, like, Iran #1, Russia #1, USA, Puh! And it's just like he was such a caricature. But when I worked in Iraq, they were like, yeah, the Iron Sheik stood in that building right there, right there. And they would all point to the same damn building, right?
Uh-huh.
It worked in Iraq. It worked there. And that's an Iranian dude in Iraq. And so it's not supposed to do that. But wrestling and theater and it works in a lot of places. It's amazing when you think about that.
Yeah. It's sort of wild to me because I mean, obviously wrestling's not like exclusively American, but you think
Sure.
of it as American, maybe being American, consuming it in America, but there's something that transcends, I think, such that even the character who's been set up as a stereotypical like Middle Eastern villain will have people from the Middle East. I don't even know if Iron Sheik is actually from where he's purported to be from. Probably not, right? But you have people where in those countries being like, yeah, that's our guy, you know, like, absolutely.
Yeah. Like Razor Ramon, absolutely not anywhere from the Caribbean, you know, not even Hispanic. A guy named Larry or whatever. Yeah. I think Iron Sheik was actually from Iran. But it doesn't matter because the character was so outsized, and everybody loves that guy. You can they're all going to the Stuckies later on and having, you know, chicken fried steaks for dinner together, you know, laughing about it. I got to tell you, though, this is a 100% true story. So my buddy was working in accident attorney work. He was an attorney, and his client had gone. This is all in Sacramento. His client had gone to the Arco Arena, and they had the Tuesday night showdown or whatever it's going to be. This is a long time ago, and the fan got into a lather and jumped into the ring. This is not planned. This is not expected. And they beat the living shit out of this guy.
Yeah.
So, and hurt him and everything else. Right. And look, yeah, don't go in the ring because these guys are working and they don't know who you are. And you know, you're not part of the gag. And so as far as they know, you're there to kill them, you know, so it's legitimate that you can probably get hurt in the ring. But then the WWE probably at the time, then they used his image of him getting waylaid in the arena to promote, like, you never know what's going to happen on Tuesday Night Raw. Yeah. And there's like, now you're in trouble. Now you got to pay him. Yes, you beat him up, and okay, we can't really get around that, but you can't use that. And so they had this lawsuit. But the stories are so compelling. Someone jumped out. This is not a big person.
Sure.
This is like an accountant, right? And he jumped into the ring. Can you believe that?
That's people's emotions get so caught up in it. When wrestling is good, I think there's maybe nothing better, right? And you get lost in the moment. And you know, I think for a lot of people too, maybe it's still real to them. They just want to get it.
Yeah. When I was a little kid, and not that little, but like maybe a late tween or an early teen, you know, my cousins from Montana came out, and I'm like, look, that stuff's real. And I didn't mean that it was like real, like they were really doing it, but like they're actually doing these stunts. They're actually getting beat up and they're actually getting hurt. And my cousin could never, he thought I was such a doofus idiot bumpkin. And I'm like, you're not hearing what I'm saying. Like, yes, you're doing pile drivers. They're not really doing pile drivers, but they're really doing dangerous things. These guys are getting hurt. They are blowing out knees. And, you know, I knew that going in, but he could never get it in his head what we were talking about. He thought the whole thing was fake and funny. He thought it was ridiculous that I believed in it. But now you talk to these guys in real life, and a lot of these guys have taken the makeup off, and they're like, listen, 27 surgeries on my back, you know, all these other kind of things. And you realize just how horrible this job is on a body.
The thing that blows my mind is some of the old timers, you'll see their foreheads and how scarred they are because they've bladed so many times to get the crimson mask, right? And it's like that again, just activates so many little things in me because it's like you're faking that you're getting hit in the head and bleeding, but like you're cutting yourself, you're actually bleeding. So like you're the injury that you're showing is the injury that you have, but you're putting it on to tell this fake story. And that just activates me as a storyteller, right? It's like, that's fascinating. And you see these guys, they're just their foreheads look like they're like fried bacon. It's just, oh my gosh. Right. And it's in that sense completely real. And the risks are completely real. And that makes me wonder, it's like, you know, what's the price of entertainment? right? I'm a big football fan, and
Sure.
I consider a lot, like, there are sports that don't involve as much brain trauma and as risk of injury as football does, but
Right.
that's sort of what we like about it, in that
Yeah.
there is this risk, there is this violence, and the more I learn about the long-term effects on these players, how a lot of the evidence of it was not paid attention to, covered up, right? Like
Right.
it gets tough to remain a fan, and I feel the same way with wrestling
Mm.
sometimes. It's like these folks, you know, if a wrestler dies before they're 50, no one really blinks an eye. It's like, okay, yeah, that's another one bites the dust, right? And it's just to think, what is that? Is it worth it? Like, is the entertainment we're drawing worth all these lives cut short? And I don't know. It's a tough thing about wrestling.
It is a tough thing about wrestling, and just the lifestyle is hard. The access to drugs and bad decisions, the self-destructive things. This is in addition to the blows to the head and everything else. And just coming back a little bit in time in our conversation, they might say it's a 10-foot cage, but Jimmy Snuka does jump off whatever height that thing is and just goes flying. And yes, the floor is padded and sprung, but not really. I mean, nobody should do that. They certainly shouldn't do it 1,000 times in their career. Right. But God damn, do I love watching him, go shock us out and just go flying. I mean, I could not get enough of it. And you think, God, like, am I contributing to this thing? And It is heavy on the conscious.
It is, and it's activating something, right? It's why you rubberneck at a car crash. It's why when the algorithm feeds you a viral video of something terrible happening, it's sometimes tough to scroll away. Something in us is hardwired to seek that stuff out, and when you step back and you look at your YouTube history and you say, what have I been watching all these years? I don't know. It's one of those things, like, I can't really justify it. I keep doing it. And I wonder if one day there'll be a reckoning, right? I wonder if there's one day where I'll just be like, I can't continue this.
Yeah. Well, and I'll tell you,
I'm okay with it.
Yeah. I mean, it's one thing to say, they're getting paid and it's their career, but I've completely given up football, partly because I don't like seeing guys like Reggie. Look, just pick a guy. It doesn't even matter which guy you pick. There's so many of them that die in their 20s, 30s, 40s, 50s, and they shouldn't be dead. So pick any player you want that dies. And I don't mean, like, look, someone dies in a boating accident and that's happened. Okay, fine, whatever. That's just an accident. But when they're dying from sleep apnea, when they're dying from shotgun blows to the chest, either self-administered or in a club, whatever, like, it's too much. And then the brain stuff, and I'm like, I can't watch them do that anymore, And then the NFL would be like, what are you talking about? My arm, it's broken. I'm like, something is not happening when it's happening. And I know they're doing their best to do their best, but I can't do it. And I'm getting there a little bit with baseball. And
really,
hey, the only way to get guys out is 100 miles an hour with 18 inches of horizontal break at 104 miles an hour. I'm like, hey, because right now Walker Buehler is working on his third elbow. And it's not working so good. And I can't watch that for too much longer. Watching guys purposely destroy their arms just so they can play this game, because I don't know that I can support that indefinitely. I'm just about done with that.
We watch sports to see the pinnacle of human achievement. We watch it to see, people push the envelope, and inevitably, when that envelope gets pushed, people are going to cross the line. People are going to get hurt. And I would like to justify my fandom in saying, well, it's worth the risk, right? Like, everyone is doing this with consent. Everyone knows what they're getting into. But then on the other hand, I would be like, okay, sure. But, like, what about that guy that played, like, low A ball and had to get, like, Tommy John surgery and go into debt to pay for it and never had a chance to make any money? Right. How many hundreds of those people are there out there?
Or 16-year-olds that get that done.
Yeah, in high school, right? People are throwing out their arms when they're kids. It's tough. I mean, because you don't want to come in and say, like, well, anything that has any risk we can't do, right? But it seems like the more the more refined and the better athletes get, in order to get that edge, you have to push a little harder. And I think we're getting to the point where the human body has physical limitations.
It sure does. Yeah, I mean, you're talking about a ligament or a muscle in the case of the elbow that is routinely giving out, and these loads that they're putting on them, pitch per pitch, is heavier, but the innings are going down, 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 and so it's an untenable situation. And you think about and we're going to get back to the book here in a second, but when you think about the Olympics and all these sprinters, they peak because they can't maintain where they're at, and then they back it off, and they won't run anywhere near their top speed. Even if they try, they can't do it, and they seem to manage it better, and they still get injured a lot and take a long time to recover. So you're right, there is something in that, and yeah, you can't avoid all danger, and I don't want them to, but to consume elbows at the rate that baseball is doing, it's hard for me to watch it.
Yeah, I'm never going to tell anyone to like, don't watch wrestling, don't watch football. I do it, so I'd be a hypocrite if I did. But yeah. I would encourage people to think about it, right? Like think about what you're participating in and why, and at least that, because I think it's important to be an active consumer, right, of media, and to consider what am I getting myself into? What am I supporting? And I'm not, we can't be pure as the driven snow. We can't be perfect. We all have vices, and maybe sport is one of those vices that at the end of the day has more good than bad. But we should have a conversation like this, right? And say, what are we really doing here?
Yeah. Yeah. How many deaths at 40 years old, looks like personally healthy Rick Rudes, though, can you take before you're like, you know what, I can't do it? I mean, is that gate out there where you're like, that's it? Look, again, like a staging accident, like what was his name? It was Owen Hart. Okay, look, you do 15 million stunts in the life of an agency, and all of these things that happen. Okay, yeah, you're going to have something that happens, and they'll always make it safer. We're not talking about that. We're talking about an apparently healthy dude who is now dead because of a cocktail of drugs and who knows why. But at some point, some people are like, hey, is that out there for you? Like, do you think it's really out there or no?
I mean, if it's not like, do you know the Chris Benoit? He was a wrestler. Tragic. Yeah. So I forget, I don't want to misconstrue, but he had lifetime wrestler, probably had some issue with CTE, ended up suiciding his entire family. One of the biggest tragedies in the wrestling business. His finishing move was a flying headbutt. Not to say that, wrestlers work safely. He's not actually like, leading head first off the top rope, right? But just the optics of, here's a guy who lost his mind, committed the worst crime ever, and his move was something that made it look like he was enduring head trauma extremely every time. And if I haven't given up wrestling after knowing about that, it's tough to say that there is a line. I would say something that probably makes it more like something that has pushed me away recently is just the WWE's involvement with like Saudi government that's been happening, and these big corporate things that are going on. I don't know. A lot of that stuff kind of turns me off, and at least makes me want to like consume more of the independent stuff, just because there's all this big stuff happening at the top. So so I would say to that, just I probably, when it comes to violence, don't. And that's the thing, right? Like, I know it's an issue, and it's like, well, what would it take, Chris, to stop? I can't really tell you. Yeah.
And to be fair to all those guys, and you just said it, these guys are pros. The missing link smashed his head into everything. I mean, everything. He would leave his makeup. I don't know if you ever saw the missing link. He's a green-faced makeup guy, and he was a freak, and he would smash his head into everything. He died of cancer in his late 60s. So, maybe a little bit early, but he grew up in an area where smoking was normal. And so he died from smoking at 68. That's got really nothing to do with wrestling. So yeah, you can have a lot, and maybe he was all fucked up at the end. Who knows? But yeah. Anyhow, so I spent time talking about these injuries because your character holds these injuries and is trying to figure out, what's next and what's going to happen. So I don't want to spoil the book or anything, but let's get into that a little bit and talk about why you chose, I don't want to call him a failed wrestler, but why you chose someone who's not a peak wrestler, and what are the elements of the story that really drew you in? Because you are talking more, I don't know, I guess, are we going to characterize him as an indie wrestler, someone who's not quite at the upper tier?
Yeah, he's in the minor leagues, so professional wrestling, right? And I just think there's a lot of folks in that position, and it's tenuous that they're on a razor's edge, right? Dom and his sister Pilar are the two main characters in the book, and they are making a wrestling life work, but just barely, right? They have this kind of very Spartan apartment in Charlotte, North Carolina. They're on the road, 5 days out of the week, trying to scrap together any match they can. And I like a character in that precarity. Dom is also, he's young, right? He's only in his like mid to late 20s, but since he's been in the ring for 10 years, his body's just been brutalized. And he's character. Hack Barlow is this big hulking lumberjack. And he's realizing that to survive as a wrestler, he has to cut. He has to slim down, put less pressure on his joints, have those bumps be a little less forceful. And so he's at this decision point where he's lost the weight. So his hulking lumberjack character isn't working anymore with his new body type. And the question becomes, who is he going to be moving forward? What's his new persona going to be?
Yeah. Yeah. He looks in the book cover. I maybe could put it up here. Looks a little bit like Dave. Who's he look like? Dave. That dang it. What's his name? Who's the guy?
Oh, like Dave Grohl.
Dave Grohl. He looks a little like Dave Grohl.
He does. He looks a little like Dave Grohl.
Yeah.
I love
it. Yeah.
I mean, he's this is kind of like the idealized version of him. I love what they did. McSweeney's does a great job with their covers, in that it's reminiscent of like an action figure box, right? Which I think I was just jazzed up that they're gonna. Oh, here's my novel. It looks like an action figure box, the complete opposite thing of a novel, which I really like for kayfabe purposes. But yeah, it's sort of his idealized form. What the artist used as inspiration were the old G.I. Joe boxes, where you have this image of the idealized image of your figure, and then you see the action figure through the little window, and they're always just like a little less heroic than they seem in the beautiful illustration. So we tried to mimic that with the cover, which I thought turned out really nice.
Yeah, there's the cover of the book right there. And by the way, since we're talking about it, let's put the link back up in here. You guys know how we do this. If you're going to support, why wouldn't you want to support Chris's book? You see how hilarious this book's going to be. It's about wrestling and entertaining. Buy two. Buddy, read it. The link is down below. You can go to Amazon or go to anywhere. You can also go to his website. So here's Chris's website. That link is also below. And this is how you support folks who are writing things and do the right thing and just directly to the person as much as possible. That's what I always ask you guys to do. So I appreciate the book cover. Why is McSweeney's good at book covers? What? Because you're not the first person to say that on the show. So what is it about them that makes them good at that?
I think being a small press, they can put the effort into it, and I can speculate about their business model, but they probably realize that to help a book stand out, like people do judge books by their covers. So if they happen to see this sitting in a bookstore, they say, "Hey, well, that looks cool," and they might pick it up and turn a few pages, and if those pages are to their liking, get hooked. They don't have a huge budget for big marketing campaigns or anything like that, but they do have a really good team of artists on staff. So I think that's they found a niche for themselves. Yeah,
and like all books, you really got to be salesman of the year for your own company, right? So you've got to be the one that goes out there and sells them. And the book cover is compelling. Did you pick the artist, or is that someone they had in house, or how did that go?
No, they they reached out to folks. It's actually a conglomerate of, I think, a couple artists. There was the artist with McSweeney's that was kind of coordinating the whole thing. And then there was different artists that did both the illustration and the 3D kind of action figure character there. So they reached out, and what I really appreciated was I think I had quite the opposite experience that a lot of authors had, in that they were asking my opinion every step of the way, to the point where I was getting like, hey, I'm a writer, I don't know anything about graphic design. If you guys think this works, I like it. I love the concept from the start. So that was a really good experience, just to be consulted that much on this. And I think most writers don't get that privilege.
Right. The why the name Kayfabe? I mean, obviously it's a wrestling term, but why that instead of whatever Dominic or whatever the character's name is?
Yeah, Kayfabe is an insider wrestling term that was been used to refer to like the fictional world of wrestling. So if you break kayfabe, you're like breaking the fourth wall, right? I think that the title's very evocative of the themes of the book, where the book's very interested in the lines between fiction and reality. It's interested in the different personas that we put forward, be it a wrestler in the ring, or maybe the personas that we put forward on social media, the personas that we put forward to our loved ones to hide maybe who we truly are and what we truly think. Something that has defined my life as a millennial is having to craft identities, right? Like there's my Instagram page is a very like precisely curated piece of my life that's meant to evoke feelings in the people that I'm communicating with. And I wanted to, it's a kayfabe, right? Like that's not really me. Like I don't show all the parts of me I don't want the public to see on that. So I just think that's something that we all do a lot now, that we have all these different avenues to express ourselves and the expectation to put yourself out there and all these things. And wrestling is all about that. That's all wrestling is putting forward these expectations, putting forward characters, and then letting the mask slip every so often to show some reality. So that's why the title.
Are you going to write more books in this style? Is there a potential franchise here, or is it like a one and done? I mean, because it's such a unique choice, right? And you don't want, maybe you want to be Wrestler Jones and you want to write this all the time, but maybe you don't. So I guess, who do you want to be? I mean, you've got your MFA, you're going to write books, obviously. Where are you headed?
Yeah, that's a good question. This is it for this book. Sorry to disappoint all the people that will love this. There will be no sequel. Pete, I started writing this in 2015. It's been almost 10 years since I started writing it, and I really like this book. Obviously, I like the characters. I like talking about it, but we're not doing another 10 years of Don here. It's just not going to happen. So, and I think as a more literary book, that's the expectation is that it's going to be a standalone product. So I've got a second book in the works, as we writers always do. It's about hiking. I'm a big hiker, and I follow a lot of like hikers on YouTube, and that's a whole genre of I'm a big YouTube guy, and I love watching people film themselves like walking through the woods and having to like be alone and talk to the camera and like make a video. It's so strange to me, and seems like such the opposite reason why I get out to the woods. Like I get out to the woods like to be alone and be in nature and unconnected, and you have people like setting up shots to show themselves walking through these like majestic vistas, and it's fascinating to me. So the book's about that. Somebody who does that, puts their hikes on YouTube, though knowing at my pace of writing, it'll probably be another 10 years before I finish it. So we'll see. I have a day job. I'm an instructional designer. So I write training, and I work a lot with, we contract with Department of Veterans Affairs to do a lot of telehealth training. And it's always a thrill when writing little training scenarios, stuff like that. I get to utilize some of the creative juices. And that's me. I have a day job. I just had a baby, 4 months old. So that's taking up all my
nice.
time.
Yeah.
Pretty regular dude.
Well, there's nothing wrong with that. And I've written scenarios for training because I've deployed and I know what the job is like. And so I love writing. I'm so glad this is one of the things you do. I love writing training that's real, right?
Mhm.
And I love, if I get the chance to write something, I love to not have any resolution. And it's like in music when you're like, why doesn't this A resolve to where it's supposed to go? And I'm like, no, because this isn't a finished piece of music. You have to go back out tomorrow. And when you leave, someone's going to go back out and someone's going to go back out. And so you don't get to resolve back to A, to the tonic key. You don't get to do that. You have to go back out and you don't ever get to know all the answers. You don't get to guess. You have to just slowly work and craft this thing together. And that's sort of how I write these things. I know like the military loves like a grand finale. I don't, because that's not what happens in real life. In real life, like even if you get blown up, it's like, hey, by the way, we're going back out tomorrow. Like, but we got blown up yesterday. Yeah, well, we're going back out. Put a dip in, put your ruck on. We're going back out. And so that's reality, right? And I think that's missed out. Like people want to make a story complete, but the story is the story.
I like that a lot. Yeah, I'm gonna think about that because I do mostly healthcare training, and that's I think the pressure is you have a scenario, let's solve it, right? Like what's the best what's the best treatment for this patient, right? But health isn't a solvable thing, right? Like especially with chronic conditions, people are going to be coming back, people's care needs are going to evolve and change. Let's write training that respects that. So yeah, I dig that.
We had a kid. This really happened. They were on patrol with MRAPs, and this kid was up in the turret on top of the MRAP. MRAP, for everybody watching, is super tall, so he's over 10 feet in the air. He's in a turret, and when you're in a turret, you're seat belted in case the thing flips, so you don't eject out. Well, they get a little lost, and so they're going. And there's 4 MRAPs, right? And so they're going under the overpass, and the third MRAP, for whatever reason, hits the overpass. And it just cleans that turret right off the top of the MRAP. Takes the kid with it. Obviously destroys the seatbelt because that thing can't stop that. And then the turret falls. And so you got to imagine this turret weighs a zillion pounds and he goes with it and he just gets smushed with it and he survives all of that. And so now you got to go render aid to your friend. And I don't even know how they got the turret off of him or how tied up in it he was, but he is wackoed, and so he survives medevac, but he dies en route. Like that's a heavy scenario, and so you go out and you provide aid to your friend. You do your best, but the answer is you didn't make it. And that's a heavy thing to think about. Like, and that's the real training you have to do because what we did the next day? Went back out on another mission because that's what happens. That's heavy, but that's real. It's real.
Dang. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. It's well, but like that's what you're trying to do with a scenario, right? Is to make it hard in training so that when you do the hard thing in real life, you're like, yeah, training was real. That really happened. And I was prepared for that.
Yeah, I think so. I think obviously the more you can make your training environment like what you're going to expect in real life, what you're going to encounter, the better. It's tough in the work that I do where we have, very limited budget, very limited capabilities. Anytime we do any sort of scenario-based learning is a rarity. It's by scenario-based, it's text. It might be a little voiceover. It might be a couple of still images.
Yeah. I gotcha.
We always have you, I'm interested in your experience with the military. If virtual reality has ever played into that, maybe in the training sphere, because the thing in instructional design is always like, how can we use virtual reality? This new tool, it immerses you. It feels like you're there. And for so much of the training that I've written, it's always like, this is a whole lot of squeeze for not a lot of juice. So have you seen good applications of that?
I'm going to use. I'll also use. maybe not even augmented reality, because that's a specific thing too. But yes, virtual realities. Like we did rollover training in MRAPs. They take an MRAP shell. It's not a real MRAP, but it's the vehicle, and it's like a dryer, and they go brr, 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 and they tumble it over, and now you've got to get out. And so you physically have gone from being upright to upside down, and you're buckled in, and hopefully everything in your actual MRAP when you deploy is strapped down. But all of a sudden you realize that like if everything is strapped down, like if you've got a case of Cokes, which is very common, or a cooler full of drinks and ice because it's hot and you need to drink, if that thing's loose, oh man, you're fucked, because that thing is just going to be a ba-bam, ba-bam. And if that thing hits you when it's 40 pounds, forget it. You're going to break your neck. Something bad's going to happen. And then you got to get out. And if you got to get out in a hurry, you can't be pulling on it. Everything has to be deliberate. It has to be slow. It has to be calm. And so that is a very powerful version, I would say, of virtual reality. There's no goggles on your face or any of that kind of thing, but you put someone in that environment. Now, if you could add another element of reality of like, hey, here comes the water, and you've got 10 seconds to get out, or 30 seconds. Now, maybe then that extra element of virtual reality would also give you an idea of what that looks like, or whatever it is. Another one was we did like you're in a 360 theater with a Humvee in it. You've got a gunner. It's just like a regular Humvee, and it's projected all around you, and you get vertigo. And so people puke in this thing all the time. I'm not even a person that gets vertigo, and I had to you take your foot and you stick it out of the vehicle and you put it on the ground. And for most everybody, that kind of grounds you and your ear stops freaking out. But that was helpful, I guess. Not really my job. I'm a spy, so I'm going to go talk to people, but they wanted us to go through it, But I think for me, in my job, if there was virtual reality where I could get practice having meetings with people, because that's the biggest thing, is you're always doing what we call fish bowls. And so you're watching someone have a meeting. You're watching somebody. Well, that's how Chris does a meeting, or that's how Dave does a meeting, or that's how Tina does a meeting. But how am I going to do it? And is my person I'm talking to adversarial? Are they trying to run me? Are they being nice for the bad reasons? Are they being nice I don't know. And no one ever trains you on sorting that out. So sitting there with the set of goggles on, or whatever the virtual reality elements are going to be. Like, okay, so high-end house clearing things, right? They physically go into a house, they have a kill house, and they get really good at it. They even use live rounds. Well, there's not that for me, where I've got to go into a barbershop and I've got to engage these people. And I can pass, fail, depending on how I do, and you train someone on the skills. Something like that would be, I think, invaluable, because a guy like me needs reps. They need reps on how to do things right. And it just takes a long time to develop someone like me. So giving someone something where they could sit in their office or in their house and just do like, hey, let me do a couple practice meetings with this challenging character. I think that would be huge.
Yeah. And maybe you avoid the cost of having to, because I imagine the theater where you're doing it matters, right? Depending on if you're at a barbershop or some other place where what's the surrounds is, maybe you can utilize some of that or what have you. So if that's always the white whale, I think, is how you can cheaply use all these new technologies to enhance the training experience without just throwing bells and whistles at your learner just for the sake of we have a new toy, right? Here, it's how best to utilize those new tools.
Yeah. Well, and I think keeping it as human as possible is better. Like there's a guy, he has a company called Red 6, and they have an augmented reality where you put on a helmet, you fly your airplane, right? And so it uses some AI. And so what it is you're flying your actual craft, and you're learning the physical demands of flying and, say, refueling. And so there is a virtual refueling thing that you can see through your lens of your helmet while you're flying through the air. So it's a flight simulator, except for you're actually not simulating the flight, but you are simulating the refueling. So the first time you refuel, it's not the first time you've physically done it in the air and everything else. And so you can do formation flying, you can do dogfighting, and then the dogfighting can get even more complex. So now you're not tearing apart two airplanes dogfighting each other. You're not risking crashing and all these other things that happen. I think in my world, you could have, let's say, look, I'm an expert at being a spy, and you're trying to learn how to be one. You and I could have 10 sessions and I get paid whatever it is, $25,000 to do 10 sessions with you. We work on these things and I give you notes, and then whatever, you do whatever kind of training you need. But I can just stick my headset on, you stick your headset. We don't even got to be in the same room, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so now, instead of me moving to Arizona where I don't want to move, you are wherever you need to be, and then we could reinforce some aspect. Like I could get a brief like, hey, we want you to work with Chris and work on his mad minutes. And so we'll just go 25 mad minutes, which is just a way of communication. And so that kind of thing, I think in my field would be really powerful, because you just can't get enough reps. And then maybe you have a powwow session with Pete afterwards. Like, hey, what did you think? How did I do? And then, something like that. And then we don't physically have to be in the same spot. No one's got to pay me TDY to go to DC, all of those kind of things. We went from wrestling.
What a great tangent.
Yeah. Intelligence training ops, but
Love it.
But that's what scenarios are about, though, right? Like, how do you make this thing more real? I don't have to sit in front of you and talk and drink a beer. We can put on helmets. That is an amazing thing that we can do for the right kind of thing. And if we're talking about people talking, absolutely. Absolutely.
People are really good at like suspending disbelief. And I think we're trained by media to do that a lot. So I think virtual reality, when I first tried it, like kind of blew me away, right? Because I didn't expect, like, especially the early, like, consumer units, they weren't very good, right? Like you have this like very narrow tunnel vision, the pixels and graphics like not very sharp, but because you're seeing in 3D, and when you move your vision, like the field moves, like you can convince yourself pretty quickly that like I'm in a reality here. Like this is no longer a video game, right? I'm in a different place. Yeah. And the fidelity doesn't have to be perfect. So, and that's, it intrigues me about like it intrigues me how much like it hasn't become mainstream yet. We have all these companies putting all this like meta, just like throwing money at it. And most people I know don't have a headset, even though they've been made super cheap, probably artificially cheap. Right. And there's something about it. They can't crack it. It's like driverless cars, right? They just can't quite. We can do it, but we can't quite perfect it.
Right. Like we love it in football. We love those lines in the field. We love that. We love the augmented reality nature of it. Mm-hmm. But I don't want to play along with them. There's all kinds of video games people think of are like, now you can run with them. I don't want to do that. I want to sit here and eat a hot dog. You know, the Red 6, dude, their stuff's amazing. And so there is, I don't know if today it's true, but back when I was doing a show with them, there was a wire cube up above Malibu. And this sounds crazy, the words that I'm saying, but you could never see it unless you had the shield on your head. But geographically, when you flew, I was like, hey, what's that? And then the guy flying, because I can't fly an airplane, the guy, Tom, he's like, that's that cube I was telling you about. And I'm like, you weren't fucking around. There's actually a cube. He's like, well, we're going to fly through it. And I'm like, what? And so you're in this canopy, and I'm like, we're flying through that cube, and the whole time it's on my screen on my face, but it didn't move. I moved through it, actually in real life, and so it really was this blending of realities. And when you put that bogey on the screen, and I'm like, oh my God, I see a bogey. Like you get excited about it. And by the way, when because this guy's a Top Gun pilot, right? He's not fucking around. And so when he's like, bam, and he slams that stick, I'm like, Argh! I'm like Tom Cruise when he Top Gun, you're like doing all of that. You're really doing it. And so not only are you making the leap mentally, but you're physically forced to make the leap. And you get why that kind of training is going to be so powerful for someone who flies. I mean, look how much jets cost today. It's ridiculous. Right. And so if you could keep those guys safer, if you could tear up less jets, heck, that's a whole lot better.
Yeah. Yeah. Preach. Yeah. We should look, where's my jet? I want a military grade flight.
Oh my gosh.
Play around
with. That's great. Okay. So this is the question I love to ask authors and everything. When you go to a party though, do you say, I write scenarios? Do you say you're an author? What do you say?
Well, I guess that's a choice I have to start making now that I've actually published a thing. No, I mostly tell people my day job, and I think that's because I don't make my living off my I make my living off my writing through the day job, right? I mean, I'm writing all day, every day, but my fiction is, and it's more than a hobby because it's something it's more attached to my soul than that, I think. But I don't know. It would feel weird to go to a party and be like, I'm a novelist. It's like, I'm not really. If I was feeding my kid with this, then maybe I could call myself a novelist, but I'm not. I hope it does at least buy several copies.
Yeah, by the way, everybody, check out how cool Chris is, man. Buy his book. I mean, what does this thing cost? Let me go look on here on the internet. When I had it pulled up a minute ago, and I took the page down, but it doesn't cost that much. Go buy this damn book. Come on. I'll pull it up right now with my link. I had MP Woodward on. MP right now currently writes his own stuff, but he's also writing in the Clancy universe, and he writes the Jack Ryan Jr. novels, right? And he's like, I feel bad talking about being a novelist, so I just say, and he's like, doesn't say, he's like, I'm a fantastically successful author. I write for the Tom Clancy franchise, and I have my own successful franchise, and I used to be a tech entrepreneur, and before that, I was in the Navy. I was in intelligence. He doesn't say those things. He's like, I'm a writer. The sooner we can stop talking about me, the better. And so, that's what he does.
I think that's pretty common, and it makes me wonder what's the stigma, right?
Yeah.
Why aren't people like, I'm a writer? Is it because of the baggage? Is there expectations of baggage or something? Do you not want people to be like, well, have I read your book? And all the cliches. I don't know. I guess for me, it's probably that I don't want somebody to think that that's my day job, because it's so hard to be your day job. People do it, but you have to either be very good, very lucky, or on your hustle. And I am not on my hustle.
Yeah. But you're not that far away, right? And so if this thing does well at all, you've already got the next book in the hopper. You're not writing at a great pace, but there's all kinds of authors that don't put out a book a year. And then all of a sudden you're like, hey, because the next time a book sits on a shelf for a while and then goes bestseller 5 years after you wrote it, and you're like, who knew? Like, that happens all the time. And I'm not saying this book won't go and do great right now, but I know an author, fantastically successful author, also has written for Tom Clancy. And one of his books, just one day, like someone's like, hey, this is the book. And it got on the right list, and it went off to the moon, and he's like, I thought that book was a dud.
It happens.
So you just never know. Yeah.
Yeah. One of the inspirations late in the game for this book was Fake Accounts by Lauren Euler. It came from a small press, and you couldn't get it because it got on the list, it got popular, and it was small press, and they weren't prepared for how popular it was.
Right.
And so it took a while for them to get a second printing wound up for it. So, hey, fingers crossed. Obviously I'm hoping it does well. I want people to read it. But it's something that I would have written regardless, and I got fortunate in that it was good enough to get bought and to see actual readers. So I'm just riding the roller coaster, having conversations with folks like you, and enjoying this really fun time.
Yeah, man, I think it's cool. I'm glad you're doing it, and I love that you're off on the adventure. When do you expect the next book to come out?
Oh, it's in early days. No, it's like if it's like I said, if it's another 10 years, I wouldn't be surprised. Especially like Pete, right now, people ask like, well, are you writing in your free time? It's like, well, no, in the free time I'm promoting. And if I have
that's right, you're selling a book right now. Yeah.
If I have any free time beyond that and my child and my wife, it's trying desperately to maintain friendships that have been had to put on the back burner these past few months. So it's a busy time.
It is a lot of work to sell books. It is a lot of work, and have a job, and have a wife, and have friends, and have a kid. It's a lot of work. People understand, like, it's talking to MP, right? Like, you've got your dream job. You get to write novels for one of the biggest, probably the biggest franchise in the world, right? Like all credit to J.K. Rowling. No one else is writing her books for the most part. She writes her own stuff, right? But there's a lot of people writing Tom Clancy books, and they sell like crazy. And so I'm like, how long can you keep it up? Because if you want to write your own stuff, at some point you got to say enough. I got to get off. It's like being James Bond. Like you're like, all right, enough. I can't do anything else, so I have to do this. And he's like, yeah, it's a curse, but it's the best kind of blessing too. It's wonderful. And one of the things he said, now I'm wondering, you're thinking about this, is it's like, I don't have to do all those things. I don't have to go pitch a book. I mean, look, he gets to pitch his idea within the universe, but they're going to support what he wants to do, right? And sure, he's got to talk to the other Clancy authors and make sure that they triangulate on the universe, and they got editors to help him out with that stuff. But he's not having to sell as hard. He's not having to do a lot of these things because the machine is built. He's just putting input into the machine, and for the money. We're not saying it's easy, but a lot of the work is done. He's like, versus selling my own stuff where it's all on me, and it's not all on him, but a lot more of it is on his back, And so you have to do all of the lifting until you get handed off to McSweeney's. But it's just a lot of work to do all of these things.
It would, I think that would be such a fascinating challenge to be a part of a series like that, because you have to follow suit of all the people that have written before you, including, the big guy, Tom, right? So you have to stay in universe, so to speak. And I'm sure there's a million rules and expectations that govern that. Yeah. But then you have to keep it fresh, I would imagine. I mean, these things, I would suspect there's some kind of formulaic nature to them, but within those constraints, you've got to find a new problem, a new protagonist, some new crisis in some far-flung part of the world. And I think that would be a fun challenge to have to just work in that mode and keep your readers interested, keep yourself interested. And I would have a fun time sneaking little bits of my own stuff in there, kind of, sealing it up and putting it into a corner where no one would notice. Like, I bet you didn't notice that. That's a little not something that Clancy would have put in there, but I stuck it in there.
Well, if this matters at all, I've bought your book. And so this thing will drop on the 27th. I'll be reading it. If you guys want to read it with me, that I've just purchased it. I'm going to read it on Audible. So that's what I'm doing. And I don't even know if I use my own damn link to do it. So I didn't probably get paid my 2 cents. But if you guys use the link, I'll get paid a little bit of money. Or just go to Chris's website. And there's the link for that right there. The link for the book is right there. And if you're on YouTube, it's in the remarks. And if you're on Facebook, it's probably in the remarks. But go into the show notes. You should see it right on there. All of it is easy. Or just type in Chris, just type in the man's name, and it'll come up, and you'll be able to buy the book. Anything else that you want to cover at all, Chris? And thanks so much for going on this journey with me. We talked about NFL suicide. We talked about the Iron Sheik in Iraq. Yes. All kinds of stuff. So what else do you want to cover, or any questions for me before we wrap this thing up?
Oh, this was great, Pete. Thank you so much for having me on. Thank you for purchasing. And it's been a pleasure. Best thing I would have done at 10 o'clock at night on a Thursday.
I love it. Stand by. I'll say goodbye to you in a sec. I'll come back. Hold on. Hey, thanks for watching the show. I really appreciate it. Right here, you can subscribe. Please do that. It makes the show grow. Hit that notification bell so you know which incredible guest is coming up next. Down below is the PayPal link. You can put a small subscription in. That is an enormous help. All that money goes right back into the show. And then right up over here are the next episodes you should listen to, curated by yours truly. Thank you so much for watching.